Chapter 31, Potion. Dunn Smith stared at Klein with his gray eyes for a full minute without a word, probably thinking about how many ways he could roast him. Klein didn't flinch under the pressure of silence or the piercing gaze. Instead, he matched Dunn's intensity like a deer in headlights, frozen but still kind of bold. You must understand that once you consume the potion, there will be no room for regret. Finally, Dunn broke the silence, his voice as deep and emotionless as a guy trying to get out of an awkward conversation. Klein grinned like he was trying to sell a used car. I know, but I respect the voice in me. You know, the one that says, what could possibly go wrong? Sleepless didn't meet his requirements, and neither did Spectator, which he had heard about from the Tarot Club based on the description. He was unsure when he would come across other Beyonder pathways. A slow remedy was useless for an urgent situation. Waiting was not an option. By the same logic, Corpse Collector was out of the picture too. That left him with two choices, Mystery Prior and Seer. Given that potions of the same sequence were equally dangerous and he was flying blind, the fact that both Mystery Prior and Seer met his requirements tipped the scales in his heart. Emperor Roselle's passing comment about regretting not choosing Apprentice, Marauder, and Seer lingered in his mind like an unwanted Tinder match. Plus, he gathered from the diary that as long as he figured out the true essence of digestion and acting, he could dodge most of the potion's nasty side effects. As for the whispers and illusory temptations that could lead to corruption and madness, he'd already faced that, even without being a Beyonder. Nothing like a little existential dread to keep things spicy. All right. Dunn stood up and grabbed his half-top hat like it was a trophy. As he put it on, he said, "Follow me down." Klein nodded, giving a gentleman's bow that screamed, "I'm ready for this circus." Tap, tap, tap. They ventured down, their footsteps echoing in the silent top cavernous stairwell like they were in some horror movie. Klein suddenly felt gripped by anxiety, trying to think of something to break the ice. "Captain, you mentioned that taking the potion wouldn't directly give me the corresponding knowledge of mysticism, just the qualifications to learn it. So, where does the basic knowledge of mysticism come from? Did our predecessors risk their lives for it or get it from some shady source?" Every time he went underground, the air felt surprisingly fresh. Clearly, the ventilation was on point. But the occasional draft made him shiver, like he just got caught scrolling through something NSFW. Dunn glanced at him, the darkness in his gray eyes looking deeper than a conspiracy theory. He replied calmly, "One way is exactly as you said, experimentation, summarization, and enhancement. Second, it's bestowed by the gods. Third, those dangerous whispers that others can't hear don't just growl and roar aimlessly. Sometimes they spill the tea on matters of mysticism. But from what I know, those who truly listen to those murmurs long-term end up completely bonkers. Or they turn into monsters. But hey, we have to thank them. The notebooks they left behind are like gold in the field of mysticism." Human lab rats? The underground passage's cold humidity made Klein shudder suddenly, imagining the worst. Then again, would my luck enhancement ritual, which turned into social network magic, lead to similar consequences due to the crazy, horrible murmurs? At the intersection, Dunn didn't head toward Chanis Gate or turn to the weapons, materials, and archives. Instead, he took Klein to the left, heading toward St. Selena Cathedral. Midway, he stopped and touched something to open a secret door. "This is our Nighthawk team's alchemy room. I'll get old Neil to fetch the seer potion formula and the materials from inside Chanis Gate." Looks like Lady Luck is on your side. We should still have enough materials for 2 seer potions. If not, you'd be in for a long wait. Dunn pointed to the room behind the door. "Wait in here. Later, watch old Neil concoct the potion. It's the most basic part of mysticism studies. Oh, and don't touch anything. They're either super dangerous, pricey, or both, like my ex's credit card bill." With that said, Dunn added, "Oh right, I forgot something again. Your becoming a Beyonder is due to facing danger and the need to find the notebook. The meritorious deed was only part of it. You won't be a member of our team just yet. You'll still be a civilian staff member with a matching salary. You're still on the same tasks I assigned you earlier. One more thing. Learn more about mysticism with old Neil. Schedule time with him." All right. Klein felt a bit disgruntled by the lack of a pay raise, but agreed with everything else. According to Dunn, there was still the process of learning and grasping his newfound powers after consuming the potion. If he became a formal member immediately and jumped into paranormal missions, he'd be toast. Dunn turned and took 2 steps toward the intersection before spinning back around. Another thing. Knew it. Klein was already accustomed to his captain's style. "We got something out of the Secret Order's actions," Dunn said with his usual poker face. "They probably won't provoke you anytime soon, but don't get cocky. It's because they can't confirm if the Antigonus family's notebook is important to them. From what we've discovered, they've preserved some ancient customs related to the Solomon Empire and the corrupted nobles of that period." "Got it. Thanks, Captain," Klein said, exhaling like he just finished a marathon. This was one of the reasons he didn't want to wait. Seizing the chance to become a Beyonder felt like playing roulette with his life. As he watched Dunn leave, confirming he wouldn't turn back for more, Klein slowly walked into the alchemy room. The room had long tables filled with test tubes, pipettes, scales, and crucibles, looking like a chemistry lab straight out of a horror movie, just more Spartan and ancient. Other than that, there was a huge cauldron, a dark wood ladle, a translucent crystal ball, and other items that looked like they belonged in a witch's cupboard. The dark sacred emblem and other strange symbols dotted the room, giving it a vibe that screamed, "Welcome to my nightmare." Klein looked around with interest, but he wasn't dumb enough to touch anything. After a while, he heard footsteps. Old Neil walked in carrying a tiny silver chest adorned with complicated patterns. He was still rocking his classic black robe that seemed like a throwback, complete with a felt hat that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Lad, I never expected you to choose Seer." Old Neil set down the chest and sized up Klein with his somewhat cloudy red eyes. "Your personality reminds me of mine when I was young. You're a rebel who doesn't want to follow the herd." "Not bad. Light those gas lamps and shut the door." "All right." Klein lit each gas lamp in the alchemy room, trying hard not to shake like a leaf in a windstorm. The dim light returned to the space, creating a cozy yet eerie vibe. Tack! 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 The secret door closed behind him. He turned back to see the white-haired, deep-wrinkled old Neil using a bunch of oddly tied branches to scrub the black cauldron. The concoction of a sequence potion is pretty simple, at least for sequence 7 and below. No need for a special flame or any extra rituals, and definitely no incantations. You won't even need to participate spiritually. Just follow the formula's steps, add the right amounts, and mix. That's all there is to it. Old Neil's wrinkles seemed to bloom into a smile that looked more like a chuckle. "For real?" Klein questioned, surprise evident in his voice. "This sounds as simple as my luck enhancement ritual. Man, it's a bit scary when you think about it. Maybe it's a gift from the gods. Praise the lady." Old Neil drew a haphazard circle over his chest like he was marking his territory. He opened the silver chest and pulled out goatskin parchment that looked ancient and ready for a museum exhibit. The yellowish-brown goatskin unfurled inch by inch, revealing words on it. Klein squinted from a distance and realized it was written in Hermes, a language he could actually read without Googling. It was written in ink that resembled blood, still looking fresh. But other than that, it didn't seem extraordinary. Seer, 100 milliliters of pure water, 13 drops of night vanilla liquid, 7 gold mint leaves. Klein silently recited the formula's content, but old Neil's wrist blocked the rest. Pure water is water that's been distilled several times. Lucky for us, I made some earlier, so we won't waste time on that. While old Neil spoke, he pulled out a large sealed glass bottle from the table, like he'd done it 100 times before. He popped the stopper and poured about 100 milliliters of pure water into the cauldron without breaking a sweat. Klein didn't dare ask anything, afraid he'd mess up old Neil's concentration. After all, he was the one who would be drinking the potion. 13 drops of night vanilla juices. This can be extracted and stored as an essential oil ahead of time. Old Neil took out a tiny brown bottle from the silver chest and, with a pipette, dripped 13 drops into the cauldron in a relaxed manner. A faint but easing fragrance emanated, making Klein feel an abnormal sense of peace. 7 gold mint leaves. Old Neil picked up a silver-patterned can and removed its lid. With his bare hands, he picked up a few leaves and scattered them into the cauldron. He caught a whiff of a fresh and stimulating scent. 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. Old Neil chuckled and looked at the potion formula on the goatskin. 3 drops of poison hemlock. This isn't something you should drink randomly. It can cause your entire body to numb to the point of death. In ancient times, it proved to be the best option for committing suicide. Klein internally rolled his eyes, thinking, "It's not like I'm silly." Old Neil changed pipettes and dripped the poison hemlock into the cauldron. The mixture produced a strange smell that freshened one's mind. 9 grams of dragon blood grass powder. Old Neil took his time to reach his hand into the silver chest and pulled out a transparent test tube. There was some deep black powder inside. He used a beaker and a scale to measure 9 grams of powder and poured it into the cauldron. He then stirred the mixture twice with the dark wood ladle. The laid-back process of making the concoction made Klein a little worried. In fact, the materials from before were just supplemental. The exact amount doesn't really affect the final outcome. Should I put a little bit more? Old Neil made a joke. The last 2 are crucial. The amount can be slightly lowered, but it cannot be too far from the requirement, or your enhancement can fail. Oh, the quantity cannot be any more, even just by a bit. If so, you will have to be treated for mental problems. It's not impossible to die immediately. Klein immediately tensed up as he saw Old Neil pull out a black glass bottle from the silver chest. Lavos squid's blood, 10 milliliters. This kind of squid is considered an extraordinary biological species. It is clearly mutated. It is covered in mystery. Its blood will rapidly break down under sunlight and lose its unique qualities. It has to be stored in opaque material. Old Neil's tone no longer sounded relaxed. He quickly and carefully retrieved 10 milliliters of blood with a test tube. The blood was blue like the sky. From time to time, it produced illusory bubbles, as though it was connected to the spiritual world. After pouring the blood inside the test tube, the remaining drops are ignored as a form of precaution, whispered Old Neil. The moment the blue blood entered the cauldron and made contact with the liquid from before, it produced bubbling sounds. The surrounding light was dyed with a light blue tinge, making Klein feel a strange sense of distance, but also familiarity. It felt like being in a mother's womb. It elevated a human soul. The final item, stellar aqua crystal, 50 grams. Old Neil's voice sounded in Klein's ears, jolting him awake as he looked at the table. In the old gentleman's hand was a piece of extremely pure crystal. Furthermore, the crystal appeared gelatinous, as though it were jelly from Earth. It lacked hardness. Under the blue light's illumination, it reflected bits of light as it seemed to contain a resplendent void of stars within. This is excellent material for the creation of divination crystals, just a little less in consideration of any mistakes. As Old Neil measured, he used a tiny patterned silver blade to extract the crystal. Pure water, night vanilla, gold mint leaves, poison hemlock juice, dragon bloodgrass, Lavos squid blood, and stellar aqua crystal make up a seer. At that moment, Klein could not help but recall the formula. With everything done, Old Neil poured a few blocks of stellar aqua crystal into the cauldron. Sizzle. Illusory fog instantly spewed forth, turning the alchemy room into a blur. Klein seemed to see a vast array of stars amid the fog and felt like he was being observed by an invisible existence. A few seconds later, the fog dissipated. Old Neil used the dark wood ladle and scooped out some sticky dark blue liquid. It had strange characteristics, gooey and inseparable. Not one bit was left in the black cauldron. The dark blue liquid was poured into an opaque cup before Old Neil pointed at it. "It's done, your seer potion." Chapter 32. Spirit Vision. Klein looked at the dark blue gelatinous liquid, trying to figure out if it was more of a block or a cup of liquid. He swallowed hard and said, "Am I supposed to drink it just like that? No rituals, incantations, or maybe a quick prayer to the spirit gods?" Old Neil shot back. "Preparation? Sure. Grab a cup of Intis Ormir grape wine, suck on a Desi cigar, whistle a relaxing tune, and bust out some court dance moves. If you're feeling fancy, throw in a tap dance. Oh, and let's not forget to play a round of Gwent cards." Klein's expression went from confused to downright dumbfounded. Old Neil chuckled. "Just messing with you, mate. But hey, if you're nervous, a little laughter might help." "You are quite the comedian, aren't you?" The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he fought the urge to draw his gun and shoot the punchline. He put his cane down and extended his right hand, raising the opaque cup as if it weighed a ton. The potion's smell was faint, almost ethereal, like it had been mixed with a hint of mystery and bad decisions. Lad, don't hesitate. The more you do, the more anxious you'll feel, and that's just going to mess up the whole absorption process, old Neil said casually. His back turned as he sauntered over to the water basin. He turned on the tap, giving his hands a good wash like he was preparing for a fancy dinner party. Klein took a deep breath, pinched his nose like he was downing some nasty medicine as a kid, and tipped the cup back in one go. A cool, smooth sensation rushed through his mouth and slid down his throat like it was on a water slide. As the sticky, dark blue liquid slithered through him, it felt like it was growing long, thin tentacles, sending shivers and cold jolts through every cell in his body. Klein couldn't help but convulse as his vision blurred. All colors ramped up to 11. Reds were redder, blues were bluer, and blacks were so black they'd make a goth jealous. It looked like someone splashed an impressionist painting all over his field of vision. He'd seen this scene before, back when he was grilled by the spirit medium daily. At that moment, his vision swirled, and though his mind felt light, it was clear, like a castaway bobbing in the ocean with nothing but jellyfish for company. Slowly, his surroundings came into focus, colors normalizing into a grayish fog. Around him were bodies that defied description, transparent objects that shouldn't exist. Deep down, clusters of clean, colored lights pulsed with life or immense knowledge. Klein thought, this is a bit like what I saw during that luck enhancement ritual. As he instinctively looked down, he noticed he was still standing in his original spot, body twitching like it had a mind of its own. Then it hit him, and suddenly his consciousness dove deep and merged with the experience. Boom! The fog dissipated, colors returning to normal. The bright, clear halo and the non-existent objects vanished in an instant. The alchemy room looked the same, but Klein felt his head was about to explode. It felt like it was being yanked apart. Whatever he had seen left countless afterimages, and his ears buzzed with an ethereal murmur. Hornassus, Phlegrea, Hornassus, Phlegrea, Hornassus, Phlegrea. Klein winced at the pain in his forehead, thoughts of causing chaos flaring up as a way to vent his discomfort. He frowned and shook his head like a dog shaking off water. Is your vision going haywire? Hearing things you didn't before? Old Neil asked, a concealed grin on his face. Yes, Mr. Neil. What's the fix for this madness? Klein grit his teeth against the mania. Old Neil chuckled. That's just the potion's energy seeping out. You're lacking control. Just focus on something simple. Picture an object in your mind. Keep it easy. Klein quickly imagined his half-top hat made from black silk. He recalled the texture and shape as if it were an old friend. Concentrate on it. Repeat the outline in your mind. Feeling better? Old Neil's voice floated into his head like a calming melody. Bit by bit, Klein zeroed in on the imagined hat. The murmurs faded into whispers before disappearing altogether. The after images stacked up neatly instead of swirling chaotically. Much better, Klein said, finally calming his chaotic thoughts and letting out a sigh of relief. He looked down at his body and noted nothing was off. Moving his limbs, half hoping and half doubting, he asked, Did I do it? Am I a seer now? Old Neil whipped out a mirror-like mercury plate and shoved it in front of him. Check out your eyes. Klein focused and saw his usual black top hat silhouette. His features looked normal, but his face was drenched in sweat. No biggie, just a typical Tuesday. When he gazed into his own eyes, he noticed they had deepened significantly. His brown eyes were so dark they could absorb the souls of lesser beings. It was like staring into a bottomless pit of mystery. This is just the potion showing off its powers. Once you learn cogitation and gather your energy, your eyes will go back to normal, Old Neil said, a smile on his face. Congratulations, our new Beyonder, our seer. Thanks. Klein reached out for a handshake. Mr. Neil, when do I get to learn this cogitate thing? You can learn it now. The initial steps of cogitation are pretty straightforward, especially for Beyonders, Old Neil replied with a grin. What you just did, focusing on an object to redirect that energy, is the first step. Give it another go. Klein closed his eyes again, conjuring up the half-top hat in his mind. His concentration sharpened, and random thoughts that dared to intrude vanished, leaving only the hat's outline. Now, let your brain go a bit blank. Switch the object in your mind. Picture something that doesn't exist in this world. Create it from thin air. You've got to stick to this rule. Only by doing so can you dive into cogitation, where I becomes one with the universe, and you unlock truths only you can comprehend. In the realm of mysticism, we call it a mystic experience, old Neil explained in a soothing tone. Just listen to my guidance. The key is to get into cogitation. Something that doesn't exist? Like, would stuff from Earth count? Klein tried picturing an earthy green intercontinental missile he'd seen on TV, swapping it out for his top hat. But no matter how hard he outlined it, he just couldn't get there. Guess it's back to the drawing board. With no other options, Klein let his imagination run wild. He envisioned a sphere of light, then more spheres, gathering them together into a fantastical collection. The spheres stacked up, floating in an otherworldly haze. Klein's thoughts drifted, ethereal and serene. His body and mind relaxed, and the objects that defied reality, bright clusters of light, and those wild colors swirled back into view. They floated nearby, teasing his senses. He reached out with his spirituality, inching closer to them, quietly absorbing their essence. Excellent, as expected from a seer. You slipped right into cogitation. Just a hair short of how I did back in the day. Just a hair, old Neil chuckled. Now let's kick off your journey into mysticism. I'll teach you the most common, easiest to grasp, and downright useful skill, spirit vision. He flicked off the gas lamps one by one, then opened the door to the alchemy room. The area darkened, but was still lit enough to make out shapes. All right, with your hands raised, put them in front of your eyes. Your index fingers should face each other, but don't touch. Open your eyes and keep them open until you get used to the darkness. Klein followed each step as old Neil instructed. He could see the shapes of his fingers and the surrounding objects in the dim light. Actually, you should be lying down to fully relax. But since you're doing well with your cogitation, let's keep going, old Neil chuckled. Focus your gaze on a point behind your hands. It has to be behind. Then, slowly move your fingers without touching them or taking them out of your sight. Klein listened carefully and directed his gaze to an empty spot behind his palms, slowly moving his index fingers within view. Once, twice, thrice. Suddenly, he saw a fiery red color flickering between his fingers. He let out, surprised. You see color? That's right. That's the first step to spirit vision. The color you're seeing is your aura, old Neil said, chuckling. No rush. Keep it steady and look elsewhere. I'll also explain the meanings of the colors while we're at it. Got it. Klein moved his fingers back and forth, keeping his focus on the fiery red. Old Neil pondered for a moment and continued. To break it down, the mainstream mysticism splits the non-physical aspects of a human into 4 levels. At its core is the spirit body, which is also everyone's basic spirituality. There is a school of thought that believes all biological creatures have spirituality and have a spirit body. I'm not sure about anything else, old Neil continued, but to mystery priors, the goal of cogitation and the method to increase our strength is directed toward the spirit body. Outside the spirit body is the astral projection. It is the means for the spirit body to communicate with the spirit world and with stellar space. It's considered an external manifestation of the spirit body. Besides, it will be directly related to your personal ambition and your prevailing emotions. The scenes you see after consuming the potion are scenes your astral projection sees when it wanders through the spirit world. That world does not obey the laws of the physical world. It involves exceeding the concept of I, the limitless I, and the universe's I. The past, present, and future might be stacked upon one another, and that is the source of divination. In the spirit world, what you see is just an imagery, a symbol. You have to interpret it to understand its actual meaning. Divination and many magic spells are cast through the astral projection. Do not mistake its relationship and differences with a spirit body. One is just a body, and the other is for form. Klein continued looking at the aura in between his fingertips and made the simple conclusion. Further out will be the body of heart and mind. From this point forth, it will combine with the physical body. It involves your brain and is an overall manifestation of your inferential abilities, your analytical abilities, your observational abilities, and identification abilities. Some potions will mainly raise this. Quite a number of magic spells target it as well. Old Neil explained in relatively great detail. The outermost layer is the ether body. It is a manifestation of your vital energies and physical form. The aura color you see is an external phenomenon of your ether body. In other words, apart from the spiritual bodies, ghosts, and specters you can see directly with spirit vision, it might also include certain existences that should not be seen. You can also see the ether bodies of others or their auras. From their thickness, brightness, and color, you can determine their health and emotional state. When your spirit vision improves and you grasp more mysticism knowledge, you will be able to discover even more details. You can even determine the lifespan of others. By the way, the emotional state I mentioned would also manifest itself because of your astral projection. When you go higher in sequence, your spirit vision will reach a relatively high stage. You can even be able to see someone else's astral projection. That way, you will learn even more things. This is a level only seers and mystery priors can attain. Some fellows even claim that the strongest form of spirit vision allows one to see anything in any place, including the past and future. However, I'm skeptical about it. It sounds quite powerful. Klein was almost turning eager. Old Neil coughed and continued. Let's return to the ether body and the colors of the auras. Your limbs and parts that are required in motion will appear red. Your head and brain surface will appear as purple. Spots that excrete waste will appear orange. The digestion system will appear as yellow. The heart and other regulatory systems will appear green. Your throat and other parts of the nervous system will appear blue. An entirely balanced body will make a body be cloaked in white. That is a symbol of health. Once it turns dark or the thickness thins, the color will change. That indicates that the corresponding spot has turned problematic. It means it's in a state of exhaustion or illness. In addition, the inner layer of the astral projection represents prevailing emotions. Red means passion and excitement. Orange means warmth and satisfaction. Yellow means happiness and extroversion. Green means calm and peace. Blue means coldness and stillness that one is in thought. White means brightness and eagerness to improve. Dark colors mean worry, sorrow, and silence. Purple means that spirituality is taking control of the lead, coldness, and estrangement. Klein silently memorized the information and stabilized his initial spirit vision. Good, you can look at other objects. Old Neil did not speak further as he nodded. Klein slowly turned his head and looked at Old Neil. Indeed, he saw different colors in different parts of his body. The aura was both thick and thin at different spots. The purple color at his head was brightest, and his limbs' redness was relatively dark. The overall whiteness of his body was somewhat faded as well. Indeed, he's getting on in age. Klein made a silent comment to himself. Only with what he saw did he feel that he had become a beyonder. I am now a beyonder. He shifted his gaze and carefully sized up Old Neil when suddenly he saw a translucent pair of cold and ruthless eyes without any brows in the void behind him. This nearly illusory pair of eyes was staring at Old Neil intently, as well as him. Klein shuddered as he gaped and said, "You have a pair of eyes behind you." Old Neil was taken aback before he forced a smile. Ignore them. Chapter 33. Switch. The moment Old Neil finished his sentence, the illusory pair of eyes lurking in the darkness behind him vanished like my motivation on a Monday morning. Even in his spirit vision state, Klein was no longer able to identify traces of its existence. This is a characteristic of ritualistic magic, explained Old Neil with a chuckle, probably amused at how clueless Klein looked. Fascinating. Is spirit vision an enhanced version of yin-yang eyes? Klein felt like a kid who just unwrapped the latest video game console. In excitement, he turned his gaze and began observing every corner of the room, as if it were an IKEA showroom. He wanted to see the differences in the alchemy room with and without the spirit vision. The outlines of the objects in the dark, tables, test tubes, scales, cups, and cupboards, didn't look different from how they appeared without spirit vision. They didn't emit any lights or colors. Classic case of style over substance. Objects without lives don't have any spirituality? Klein mumbled to himself, scanning the room like a detective in a low-budget crime movie, before his eyes landed on the silver chest. Suddenly, a vibrancy of colors exploded before him. The colors were as blue as the sky, as resplendent as the stars, and as crimson red as burning flames. kind of like the aftermath of a wild party that got out of hand. Materials from extraordinary beings still have some life in them and are still active, even if the source is already dead? Klein deliberated on his words, feeling like a scientist at a rave. A precise description is that they have remnant spiritualities. It's one of the crucial points of a successful potion concoction. It's also one of the reasons why a Beyonder will lose control. Dunn should have already informed you, explained old Neil frankly, as if he were giving a TED talk. He suddenly laughed, recalling something. I remember that the formula of Corpse Collector requires a discated mature black-spotted frog. Consuming that potion requires a lot of courage and maybe a stiff drink. Klein imagined it and found it disgusting. He did not echo old Neil's words and turned his gaze to a dark area, still hoping to see some spooky spirits. However, there were no spiritual bodies or ghosts that he looked forward to seeing. Isn't it said that the world of spirits is everywhere? He asked out of curiosity, sounding like a kid asking about the tooth fairy. Old Neil chuckled tersely before saying, Punk, repeat after me. This is the headquarters of a Nighthawk squad. This is the ground beneath the church of the Evernight goddess. There are many Beyonders here. Do you think we will allow spirits and souls to wander around? Furthermore, the spiritual world and spirit are two different concepts. Klein felt a little embarrassed as he turned his head, pretending to look at the faint light from the gas lamps at the entrance, trying to act all wise. I get it. While speaking, the area between his brows began to spasm, which felt like the universe was giving him a cosmic headache. What's happening? Just as Klein turned around to ask, he suddenly saw a figure standing quietly by the door at the periphery of the light. It appeared human, though its aura's colors blended perfectly with the darkness, making it impossible to discern. Hiss! Klein felt a painful spasm at his glabella. His vision turned chaotic as he focused again, but there was no formless figure. Just his imagination playing tricks on him. Strange? He turned around and asked, Mr. Neil, the spot in between my brows is a little painful from spasms. It's like my brain is throwing a mini rave. Haha, this is very common. You are a new Beyonder. Spirit vision places a great burden on your spirit body. Furthermore, it drains you constantly. Physical effects can be glabella spasms, headaches, oversensitivity, and minor bouts of hallucinations. And while viewing things with spirit vision, it's very easy to feel uncomfortable as a result of the unfamiliar surroundings. It's also very easy to have your emotions affected by others. These are things that require you to pay attention. You can become accustomed to and eliminate them with repeated practice. In addition, use it sparingly and end it in a timely fashion, answered old Neil with a smile, probably relishing Klein's confusion. Why does it feel like you are delighted by this? Klein hurriedly asked for advice. Then, how do I exit from the state of having spirit vision? He had planned on mentioning the invisible figure he had seen, but when he heard of the minor bouts of hallucination among the symptoms, he struck that thought away like a bad date. From the glabella spasm and headache, he could guess old Neil's answer. Like before, think of an item to divert your attention. It will bring you out of cogitation. Close your eyes and control your spirituality, and repeatedly tell it to end. When you open your eyes again, you will discover that your spirit vision has ended. Old Neil described leisurely, and when he was done, he added, Of course, that is the most trivial and clumsy method. We can repeatedly hint to ourselves in cogitation from practice to affect our spirituality. That way, you will have a simple switch. For instance, tapping your glabella twice lightly would allow you to easily activate spirit vision. Another 2 taps will simply end it. As for how you set it up, it depends on your habits and preferences. But don't be tapping your forehead in public. That'll raise eyebrows. Got it. Klein thought for a moment and planned to imitate old Neil to use tapping his glabella twice as a switch for his spirit vision. Tapping once could be mistaken for a random headache, and tapping thrice could waste valuable time in dangerous situations. As for actions like snapping fingers, they were too attention-drawing, like a catwalk model strutting in a funeral. He eased his focus and imagined the stacked spheres of light, re-entering a state of cogitation. Under old Neil's guidance, after repeated hints and practice, he finally set up his switch. He clenched his fist slightly and used his index finger's joint to tap at his glabella twice. Immediately, Glowing auras of differing thickness and colors appeared before his eyes, like a psychedelic trip. After another 2 taps, everything returned to normal. I've finally grasped it, he sighed with delight, feeling like he had just unlocked a cheat code in a video game. Only then did he realize how exhausted he was, feeling like he could fall asleep at any time. His mind hurt as though he had stayed up for 3 nights binge-watching a series. Old Neil said with a chuckle, "We are not sleepless. Every practice and every time spirit vision is used excessively, you will need some sleep. You can now go back and have a good rest. In the afternoon, go to Iron Cross Street, where Welch's place is, and walk around. Try your best to find clues about the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. Tomorrow, I'll continue teaching you about mysticism. Of course, do not forget to read the historical documents, and maybe take a nap in between. You look like you could use one." All right? Klein was in full agreement with old Neil's arrangements, partly because he didn't want to argue with someone who probably knew more about spirits than he did. He picked up his cane and left the alchemy room. He watched the door close as old Neil returned to the armory. Klein massaged his glabella and temples, and with the help of his cane, sauntered up the stairwell, looking like he was trying to pull off an old-timey detective vibe. At that moment, Dunn Smith came from behind him with the corners of his lips hooked. With a deep gaze, he said, "I heard from old Neil that you are a very suitable candidate. Even without cogitation, you were able to use spirit vision." "Perhaps it's a unique trait of being a seer," replied Klein humbly, trying not to sound too impressed with himself. He guessed that Dunn had been watching the armory for old Neil. Dunn slowed down and went ahead of Klein a little. After a few seconds of silence, he turned around and said, "You have to remember that curiosity killed the cat. It can also kill beyonders. Do not attempt to probe the murmurings you should not be listening or see existences you should not see. No one likes a nosy neighbor." All right. Klein knew this was another reminder of how beyonders lost control, and he was not about to end up as a ghost in someone's horror story. After entering Blackthorn Security Company, he greeted Roseanne, who obviously did not know that he had become a beyonder. He slowly walked out the door and reached the streets, where he took a trackless carriage to Daffodil Street. He nearly fell asleep on his return journey, fighting the urge to drool all over the seat. It was still in the morning, and the temperature was about 26 degrees Celsius. Klein pulled out a copper key from his waistband and opened the door to his home, feeling like a secret agent on a mission. There were still many items missing from his home. The living room and dining hall were still empty. Benson and Melissa had work or school, so they had both left early in the morning, probably to avoid awkward family conversations. Klein did not have the capacity to bother with anything else. He closed the door and briskly went to the second floor and entered the bookshelf-equipped bedroom that belonged to him. After taking off his tuxedo and hanging it on a clothing rack, he eagerly plunged into bed. The moment his head hit the pillow, he fell asleep. Klein was awoken by bright sunlight. He turned his head and slowly opened his eyes to discover the burning sun outside. "What time is it? Did I miss the tarot club in the afternoon?" He struggled to get up and walked to the clothing rack to take out his pocket watch from the pocket of the tuxedo's inner lining. Not only had he forgotten about the matter, he had forgotten to close the door to his bedroom and pull the curtains to the oriel window. Pah! Klein pulled out the pocket watch and immediately felt relieved when he opened it. It was only slightly past noon. There was still a lot of time until the scheduled gathering at 3 in the afternoon. It was Monday, the day he would have a gathering with the Hanged Man and Justice. Klein went into thought as he tapped his glabella twice. The scene before him changed once again as he saw that his body had restored to a bright luster. He tapped twice again and stopped his spirit vision. Relaxed, he went to the first floor and boiled a kettle of water. He placed some inferior quality tea leaves and chewed on some rye bread dabbed in a little butter. Afterwards, Klein flipped through historical materials and original Klein's diary. He began revising and consolidating his knowledge. At 2:57 p.m., Klein closed his book and capped his fountain pen before pulling the curtains. Immediately following that, he locked the bedroom's door, making the room turn abnormally dark. He tapped his glabella twice and activated spirit vision to survey his surroundings. After confirming that there were no invisible spiritual bodies in his room, Klein stopped the spirit vision and took out his pocket watch to check the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. 1 minute before 3, he opened up his pace and, like before, walked 4 steps in a counterclockwise manner in a squarish shape. He incanted in Chinese softly. Only this time, he did not prepare any staple food. Klein closed his eyes as he felt the back of his hands turn itchy. It felt like the 4 black dots forming a square was protruding and projecting something. Hysterical shouts and alluring murmurs began resounding, but Klein realized that the headache was not as bad as the first time. It was not that he was unaffected, but that he was doing his best to stop himself from listening. As a Beyonder, he had to have more self-control in such an environment. Soon, his body turned light as he floated up. He saw the grayish-white and blurry fog that emanated. Then, he saw dark red stars. 2 of them had a minuscule connection with him, with an abnormal sense of familiarity. Klein looked at his blurry self and muttered in confusion, "The astral projection that old Neil mentioned?" He remained calm for a few seconds and again transformed the opulent divine palace with the tall bronze table under the domed ceiling, as well as the 22 high-back chairs that corresponded to the different constellations. Klein calmly walked to the seat of honor and made his body and face be immersed in thicker gray fog. He extended his right hand and tapped 2 familiar deep red stars and created a miraculous connection. Chapter 34. Advance Payment. In an underground basement without any windows, the burly Alger Wilson sat by a long table cluttered with various apparatuses and goatskin parchments, looking like a mad scientist who lost a bet and ended up in a horror movie. In front of him was a half-consumed candle. The dim, yellowish flame flickered like it was trying to impress a date, casting shadows that danced around the room like they were auditioning for a spooky thriller. Alger's hair was a disheveled mess, resembling seaweed washed ashore, and it was a deep blue that almost looked black. He wore a robe embroidered with lightning patterns, likely hoping it would give him some electric charisma. Clasping his hands with his thumbs facing each other, he focused on a bottle of black liquid to the left of the candle, probably wishing it was something stronger. Whoosh! 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 Splash! 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 The sounds of tempestuous winds or crashing sea waves howled from the sealed bottle, as if it was auditioning for a dramatic role. In spots where the black ink didn't sink, a faint fog swirled like it was trying to get the party started. It was as though it grew eyes and a mouth. Definitely not the type of company one would want in a dark basement. Alger cocked his head to glance at the clock hanging on the wall, watching the needle strike 3, probably wondering if he'd missed lunch. He pressed down on his temple as his eyes turned dark, a real mood killer. Fascinating colors surfaced from the various items on the table, as if they were trying to distract him from his impending doom. At that moment, a deep red light appeared like a tidal wave from nowhere, drowning him instantly. Talk about a surprise party nobody wanted. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. After dismissing her dance teacher, Audrey locked the door and sat straight up in front of her dressing table, like she was prepping for a beauty pageant. The sun outside was bright and gorgeous, but inside, it was all about business. There was a light brown notebook made of exquisite goatskin, flipped open to reveal that it was blank, an artist's worst nightmare. To its right was a fountain pen with a golden tip and embedded rubies, definitely more bling than one would need for scribbling grocery lists. Audrey making sure she could pick up the fountain pen and write down the formula the moment she left the gathering. "I'm so looking forward to it," she inhaled, repressing her excitement as she looked at the mirror with puckered lips. If only my reflection could show me a better hair day. However, she didn't see her own reflection. Instead, a dark red and illusory beam burst out from her body. Well, that's not concerning at all. Above the gray fog stood a majestic divine hall that looked like a giant's residence, probably where oversized furniture went to die. Dark red colors bloomed on both sides of the bronze table, surging upwards like a fountain before pattering down, like a cheap magic trick gone wrong. It carved 2 blurry figures who sat in the same spots as before. Audrey, with her soft blonde hair and tall, slim build, instinctively looked towards the seat of honor. She saw the figure immersed in thick gray fog, sitting back like he was too cool for school. One hand was flat, touching the table's side, while the other hand stroked his chin. Definitely a vibe. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool! Audrey shouted with a cheery voice, probably too loud for the eerie atmosphere. Following that, she turned her head and looked at the person opposite her. With the same tone, she said, Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. This lady sure is unsophisticated. Is she so sure that I'm a good person? Why isn't there any fear from her? Is she a noble lady who has been protected like a rare Pokemon? Klein smiled and maintained his unfathomable image, thinking that maybe he should start charging for appearances. Good afternoon, Miss Justice. As he spoke, he lowered his head slightly and moved his left hand, tapping his glabella twice, likely contemplating life's big questions, like what to have for dinner. What he saw changed instantly. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man emitting the colors of their aura, and the surrounding gray fog and dark red stars remained the same. Nothing that seemingly didn't exist or lustrous brilliances that possessed life was seen. Just your typical Tuesday in a fantasy world. He shifted his gaze and saw that Justice's aura perfectly matched the colors old Neil described. What was supposed to be red, purple, blue, or white were their respective colors. Furthermore, they maintained a lustrous brilliance and were of appropriate thickness, definitely thicker than my patience for boring meetings. The colors of her emotions are red and yellow. That's joy, zeal, and excitement. Klein made a judgment before casting his attention toward the Hanged Man, who was looking a bit like he'd just lost a game of poker. Like Justice, there was nothing special about the Hanged Man's aura. His emotions were blue mixed with some orange. Calm, thoughtful, careful, and a little pleased. With this being his first attempt, Klein made a conclusion without much confidence, kind of like going into an exam without studying. Just as he shifted his gaze away, he suddenly realized something strange. The aura of the Hanged Man's innermost layer was nearly of the same color. Klein focused his mind and took another careful look. He could faintly see that deep within the Hanged Man's ether body was a deep blue, akin to the sea. It felt like a tidal storm, definitely a mood. His astral projection? Or should I say the surface of his astral projection? From the looks of it, he's really a beyonder, and one that's apparently stronger than old Neil, who was just a wannabe. Klein analyzed as his mind was filled with questions. Not necessary. It might have to do with this being a unique environment. It's only because this is my home ground that I'm able to see these things that old Neil did not manifest. He turned his head toward Justice again and confirmed that it was a characteristic only Beyonders possessed. At that moment, Alger also completed his greetings, like a proper host at a bizarre dinner party. Audrey drew a light gasp as she asked in anticipation, Mr. Hanged Man, did you receive the box of ghost shark blood? Alger took a look at Klein and saw him tapping his glabella as though he was considering other matters, probably what he'd do if he won the lottery. Thank you very much. It perfectly met my expectations. I never expected you to send it to me so quickly. The ghost shark blood is not the typical extraordinary creature, said Alger frankly, clearly trying to impress everyone with his sea creature knowledge. Audrey smiled humbly and said, I'm very happy to see this outcome, feeling like a proud parent. As she loved anything to do with mystery from a young age, she had befriended those in aristocratic circles with similar interests. They exchanged information, books, and rare artifacts among each other. But before this, none of them had ever obtained any supernatural power to become a real Beyonder. Instead, there were a few princes that hinted they could gift them what they wanted if they became their princess consort. Definitely not the type of fairy tale she was hoping for. However, she had obtained the ghost shark blood directly from her family's vault. After all, the inventory only states one big bottle without mentioning how many milliliters or how full it had to be. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cow teeth peonal powder, 7 petals of elf flowers, a matured manhwa fish's eyeball. Add 35 milliliters of goat-horned black fish blood. The final 2 items are the main ingredients. They are extraordinary creatures from the sea. You have to be careful. All right. Audrey recalled and repeated, 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cow teeth. Payanol powder, reminded Alger. With his help, Audrey gradually and precisely memorized the formula's order. However, she appeared worried as she mumbled it again and again. Do you know about cogitation? When Alger saw Justice nod, he continued, I do not know how much you know about cogitation. Let me describe it once. After consuming the potion, quickly begin cogitation to control your spirituality and energy. Make sure to practice every day to truly grasp the powers of the potion. Dig out the meaning it symbolizes and even more of its mysteries. That way, you can avoid the danger of losing control to the greatest extent. And the meaning of a potion mainly lies in its name, such as spectator. Klein silently listened to the conversation and had no plans on interrupting. All he did was secretly memorize and study, but when he heard that, he suddenly had a thought. Audrey listened to the hanged man's explanations attentively, and just as she was about to inquire about something more detailed, she suddenly heard the rapping sound on the table. She and Alger turned their heads and looked at the fool. They realized that the mysterious and mighty figure was tapping gently with his fingers. He said in a deep voice, It's not about grasping them, but rather digesting them. It's not about discovery, but rather acting. The name of a potion is not only symbolic, it's also imagery. It is the key to digesting. Audrey was dazed and confused from hearing that. She was not very clear on what Mr. Fool was trying to express. She subconsciously eyed the hanged man for a reaction from the corner of her eyes. She was surprised to see him jolt and freeze. It was as though an ordinary person had heard a loud and sudden clap of thunder. Digesting, acting, digesting, acting, digesting, acting, key. Alger repeated it softly, as though he had grasped a key concept or had succumbed to a strange curse. After a while, he raised his head and said with a hoarse voice, Thank you, Mr. Fool. Your hint is as valuable as my life. You have enlightened me greatly. Of course, I believe I have yet to fully understand or comprehend it. Klein maintained his mysterious and unfathomable image by saying with a smile, That was an advance payment. In fact, he did not truly understand the exact meaning of what was said. He was just certain that Emperor Roselle was more powerful than the typical Beyonder and stronger than the Hanged Man. Advance payment. Audrey looked at the Hanged Man's reaction and knew that the hint from before was precious. As she ruminated over it, she asked, Mr. Fool, what do you wish for us to do? Opposite to her, Alger said with a nod, What matter might you wish to entrust us with? Klein leaned back slightly as he glanced at the two of them before saying in a soft and pleasant voice, Collect Roselle Gustav's secret diary on my behalf, even if it's just one page of it. Chapter 35, Exchange of Information. Roselle Gustav's secret diary? Emperor Roselle? Audrey's mind raced as she processed this information. At first, she was taken aback, but then it dawned on her that this was precisely the kind of thing that would pique the interest of someone as formidable as Mr. Fool. Rumors circulated that Emperor Roselle had once laid eyes on the blasphemy slate, and the secret cards he devised were rumored to conceal the 22 paths of the divine. Such knowledge was undoubtedly something every high-sequence Beyonder would covet. Diary? That's a diary? Alger's brow furrowed slightly, his curiosity aroused by this detail. The item left behind by Roselle Gustav had been referred to as a diary by Mr. Fool. How did he know this? How could he discern it? Did he possess the means to decode Roselle's cryptic language? As the hanged man's question hung in the air, Klein leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked in a casual display of confidence. Let's consider it a diary for now, he replied, neither denying nor confirming the assertion. Audrey recalled hearing snippets of conversations from other noble children, though she never delved deeply into the topic. Now intrigued, she asked, I've heard that Emperor Roselle's diary was written in a cryptic language or symbols of his own invention. Yes, Alger confirmed simply. Some believe it's a unique set of mystical symbols. Others think it resembles hieroglyphs. To this day, no one has managed to decipher it. That's all I know. He glanced at Klein, seeking affirmation or perhaps confirmation of his doubts. These texts have been passed down for generations, so their original meanings are long lost. How could they possibly be deciphered? Klein maintained his calm facade, suppressing a self-deprecating laugh. A ridiculous and amusing image flashed through his mind. A dark-robed mage, adorned in a black pointed hat, reveals a tattoo of a symbol supposedly infused with Emperor Rosel's mysterious power. It simply read, "Retarded Joker." Klein couldn't help but let the corners of his mouth curve upward, amused by his own thoughts. After absorbing the hanged man's information, Audrey remarked, perplexed. "If we can't understand the symbols or words, how are we supposed to relay the information to you, Mr. Fool? Are we meant to send it by mail?" That's quite a pertinent question. I have no way of discreetly accepting an item. Klein hesitated, slowly releasing his interlocked thumbs before tapping them rhythmically on the table. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. Since I can conjure a divine palace and table as I wish here, could I project thoughts into the minds of others? It was worth a shot. At that moment, Audrey and Alger observed Mr. Fool rise slowly from the depths of the thick gray fog. "Miss Justice, let's try something. Picture a paragraph of text and infuse it with the urgency of writing it. Yes, pick up the fountain pen beside you and write it on the piece of paper." Before Klein finished speaking, a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and a dark red fountain pen materialized before Audrey. Curiosity piqued. She picked up the fountain pen. Following his instructions, she envisioned a poem attributed to Emperor Rosel. "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" After examining the text carefully, she began to write, channeling her urgency into the task. Klein sensed her emotions and guided her, channeling his thoughts through her. As soon as Audrey began to write, the line manifested on the goatskin parchment. "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" "Goddess, how fascinating!" Audrey exclaimed in wonder, a hint of ruefulness creeping in. Then, looking at Klein, she asked with a trace of apprehension, "Mr. Fool, can you read my thoughts?" "No, I'm merely guiding you. I simplified the writing process and transformed it into an imprint. If you hadn't wanted it expressed, nothing would have appeared." Klein assured her in a soothing tone. "Is that so? Then we can memorize the symbols or the appearance of the cryptic text and present it directly as we see fit." Audrey sighed in relief, a flicker of enlightenment in her expression. "Yes," Klein confirmed. "That's not a bad method. Miss Justice, don't doubt your memory. Once you become a spectator, your memory will significantly improve," Alger remarked, watching the demonstration with growing respect for the enigmatic fool. Audrey nodded, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. "You've delighted me with this insight. Mr. Hanged Man, do you have any further guidance on spectators?" She turned her gaze toward the seat of honor. "Mr. Fool, I'll do my utmost to fulfill your mission. I'll work hard to gather more of Emperor Rosel's secret diary. I previously mentioned that I prefer a fair and equal exchange. The advanced payment I've given is equivalent to 2 pages of the diary for each person. If there are more, I'll provide additional compensation in return," Klein stated calmly, adopting the demeanor of a seasoned negotiator. The additional payment would naturally come from the newly acquired pages of Rosel's diary, creating a self-sustaining cycle of exchange. "You are indeed a generous gentleman," Alger replied, pausing for a moment before bowing slightly, his hand placed respectfully on his chest. After bowing, he turned back to Justice and added, "Let me reiterate, a spectator will always be a spectator. I know many spectators indulge in fantasies, imagining themselves as protagonists or characters, investing deep emotions into the narratives. They laugh, cry, rage, and wallow in sorrow due to the drama. However, that's not the role of a spectator. When faced with the myriad dramas of society and characters who knowingly or unknowingly assume particular roles, you must maintain the perspective of an absolute bystander. Only then can you objectively observe them, noting their habits, the tics of their lies, or the sense of their nervousness. From these subtle cues, you can uncover their true thoughts. Believe me, each person is unique due to their emotions. They emit different things and scents. Yet, only a true spectator can detect them. Once you become too emotionally invested, your observations will be skewed. Your sensitivity to others' emotions will falter." Audrey listened intently, her eyes gleaming with interest as she absorbed his words. "It sounds incredibly intriguing." Klein's heart stirred upon hearing that. The requirement for the spectator potion seemed to boil down to an absolutely objective and neutral spectator. In a sense, it was akin to acting. Acting? Was this the acting that Emperor Rosel had alluded to? Then I must act as a seer, digesting the potion bit by bit. Lost in contemplation, Klein was jolted back to the present as Alger concluded his explanation about spectators with a sigh. I suppose there's nothing else? Perhaps we can have a casual chat about things happening around us. What may seem trivial to you could be a vital clue for others. Sure, Klein agreed, nodding slightly. He was already plotting to experiment with his newfound role as a seer, believing there would be no adverse effects. Shall we start with you, Mr. Hanged Man? Audrey suggested eagerly. After a moment of consideration, Alger began. The infamous pirate known as Lieutenant General Deweyville has set sail once more to explore the eastern reaches of the Sonia Sea. Oh, the owner of the Black Tulip? Audrey inquired, her curiosity piqued. Yes, Alger affirmed with a nod. I don't even know who that is. Klein remained silent, contemplating what news he could share. It needed to be something that wouldn't reveal too much about him while still allowing him to gather feedback. Soon, he settled on his topic. Maintaining his enigmatic image as the fool, he caressed the bronze table with his fingers. According to my information, the Secret Order has lost an Antigonus family notebook. This news was common knowledge among the Nighthawks in Tingen City. Similarly, the Secret Order and Beyonders with close connections to them were aware of it too. An Antigonus family notebook? Alger echoed, his expression shifting to one of curiosity as he shook his head, a smile on his lips. I can't wait to see how the Church of the Evernight Goddess reacts upon learning of this. Why mention the Church of the Evernight Goddess? Klein's instincts alerted him to a potential problem, but he couldn't inquire further without jeopardizing his image as the mysterious fool. At that moment, Audrey asked curiously, Why are you so interested? What kind of special reaction might the goddess's church have? Alger smiled knowingly and explained, the Antonis family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I'm not entirely certain whether that happened at the end of the fourth epoch or in the early stages of the current epoch. This, Chapter 35, Exchange of Information. Roselle Gustav's secret diary? Emperor Roselle? Audrey's mind raced as she processed this information. At first, she was taken aback, but then it dawned on her that this was precisely the kind of thing that would pique the interest of someone as formidable as Mr. Fool. Rumors circulated that Emperor Roselle had once laid eyes on the blasphemy slate, and the secret cards he devised were rumored to conceal the 22 paths of the divine. Such knowledge was undoubtedly something every high-sequence Beyonder would covet. I never imagined that such a thing would happen. All right, my turn. Let me think of what I have to share. She cocked her head and held her head up with her hand before chuckling. Yesterday, my etiquette teacher taught me how to faint elegantly without any faux pas. It's a practical skill used at social events to avoid awkward situations or nasty guys. I was just organizing my thoughts. What I really wanted to say is that ever since the failure of the battle on Balam's eastern shore, the king, premier, and gentlemen are under immense stress. They eagerly wish to change. At this point, Klein maintained his composed demeanor as the fool, noting the underlying tension in Audrey's words. Her mention of the battle's aftermath hinted at a brewing storm within the kingdom's political landscape. Alger nodded in understanding. Change is indeed on their minds. With the recent losses, there's bound to be a shift in strategies. They might be looking for ways to regain their standing or perhaps find scapegoats for the failures. His gaze shifted thoughtfully, processing the implications of her observation. Yes, and if they don't act soon, discontent might rise among the populace. The nobles are growing restless, and whispers of rebellion could start circulating. Audrey added, her expression serious now. This is a precarious time, and they need to tread carefully. Klein's mind whirled with possibilities. The political climate was becoming increasingly unstable, and the effects of this unrest could ripple through their dealings and adventures as Beyonders. It was essential to stay informed and prepared. Indeed, it's a time to watch closely, Klein said, his voice low and thoughtful. This could lead to opportunities or dangers that we need to navigate. He glanced at both of them, gauging their reactions. Let's keep an ear to the ground for any further developments. Alger crossed his arms, contemplating the weight of their discussions. As always, knowledge is power. We must ensure we're not caught off guard. Audrey nodded vigorously, her earlier excitement replaced by the seriousness of their situation. I'll make sure to gather more information. We should remain vigilant. With the tension in the air palpable, the trio exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. They were bound not just by their roles as Beyonders, but by the shared weight of the world they were navigating. Chapter 36. A Simple Question. While Audrey recalled the conversation between her father and elder brother about the situation, she put it in her own words. They believe that the government's structure is too chaotic. Every election, if there's a change of the ruling party, there's a whole new cast from top to bottom. It's like a bad soap opera. Totally messes with the plot and drags efficiency through the mud. Not only does it lead to battle losses, but it also causes major inconveniences for the civilians. Like trying to get a decent cup of coffee when the barista is busy flirting instead of working. Klein knew that the Lone Kingdom had yet to evolve into a system that examined public servants. The political situation was still in its early days. After every election victory, many so-called positions were doled out to members and supporters like candy at a parade. Emperor Roselle not establishing such an institution in Intis does not match his personality. Could it be that he got sidetracked by the drama of ruling later in life? Maybe he was just too busy trying to figure out how to run a kingdom and keep his sanity. When the hanged man, Alger, heard that, he interjected with a soft chuckle. They believe? Their beliefs are a bit slow on the uptake. They might not feel the itch until they're scratching their skin raw after getting bitten by black mosquitoes. Black mosquitoes were a nasty little pest residing in the south of the Lowen Kingdom. They were extremely venomous, and their venom made victims feel like they had a bad case of the chickenpox and a serious urge to join a DIY skin removal project. Audrey extended her palm and covered her mouth. Ignoring the hanged man's mockery, she expressed the core info of what she said. Unfortunately, they are temporarily unable to find a good solution to replace this system. It's like trying to replace a tire on a moving car. Good luck with that. Klein listened carefully and felt that the topic was in his wheelhouse. He smiled faintly and said, "This is a simple problem." He leaned back like a self-proclaimed genius ready to drop knowledge bombs. The Foodaholic Empire and the decadent countries that studied the Foodaholic Empire have very advanced experiences of success. I mean, if they can figure out how to get their people fat and happy, surely we can run a government, right? Simple? Audrey asked, looking puzzled as if someone had just told her that pineapple belongs on pizza. Although her education didn't include politics, she often heard the discussions of her father, brother, and the people around her. She had a good grasp of similar matters, or so she thought. Klein felt like he'd time-traveled back to the forums of yesteryear. Composed, he said, an examination like an entrance exam for college. Hold an exam that's open to the public. We can split it into 2 or 3 rounds, Use the most objective method to select the elite. Think of it like a reality show, but with fewer catfights. But Audrey sensed the backlash brewing in her thoughts. Before she could organize her protests, Klein continued. Afterward, use these elites to fill the positions of the cabinet, the county government, the city government, and all those other fancy titles. Yes, positions like the secretary of the cabinet. Different positions should have different requirements. The second or third rounds can be localized. Keep it professional, keep it spicy. As for political positions like ministers, governors, or mayors, they'll be left to the parties that win the election. That's a slice of the pie they deserve, like a piece of cake at a kid's birthday party. And we all know how wild those get. Alger, who usually couldn't care less about such matters, found himself surprisingly attentive. Audrey frowned slightly, deep in thought. There's no rush to replace everyone at once. If we do, the cabinet and various agencies will collapse like a house of cards during a windstorm. You can hold exams every year or every 3 years. Gradually replace them. Eventually, as the kingdom expands and civil servants resign, we can allot spots like they're winning lottery tickets. Klein fully expressed his talent as a keyboard politician. He faced his palm outward and said, "Such a design can bring the kingdom's sharpest minds into government." Regardless of the party in power or who the minister is, the civil service will keep the kingdom running smoothly, like a well-oiled machine, just without the grease stains. Of course, one side effect was the birth of the undying devil, that was bureaucracy, which was basically the slow death of enthusiasm. While considering the suggestion, Audrey asked doubtfully, "Are you implying that even if those ministers become monkeys, the effects would be insignificant?" "No," Alger interjected suddenly. "I believe that monkeys are a better choice than the present ministers. After all, monkeys only need to eat, sleep, and mate. They won't come up with half-baked ideas or push brainless projects. I mean, have you ever seen a monkey suggest a war?" "Mr. Hanged Man, it sounds like you have a terrible superior." Klein sat at his seat of honor and shook his head in silent amusement. Picturing a troop of monkeys running the government, Audrey ruminated over Mr. Fool's suggestion and after a moment said in surprise, "It actually sounds like it might work. It's a very simple but effective solution." She looked at Klein and sincerely marveled. "Mr. Fool, you must be an elderly person with outstanding intelligence who is very experienced in life. Like a wise old sage, except with better hair." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a little as he exchanged glances with the Hanged Man and Justice for a few silent seconds, as if they were in on a joke only they understood. "Let us end today's gathering here." He had thoughts racing about how Miss Justice might influence her family and effect change on this matter. "I can guide Benson ahead of time and give him a shot at becoming a civil servant." On careful thought, Benson was indeed a good fit for such a career. But knowing Justice, she probably wouldn't take the initiative. I mean, who wants to deal with all that family drama? Of course, she could always play it sly and find a roundabout way to do it. By your will. Audrey and Alger stood up together, like they were about to go conquer the world, or at least grab a snack. Klein leaned back slightly and severed the connection. He watched as Justice and the Hanged Man's illusory figures shattered and dissipated like a bad dream. Above the gray fog, in the opulent palace where gods seemed to live, he was the only one sitting silently at the head of the bronze table. Klein didn't dive into the gray fog like he usually did. His mind was still buzzing with energy after becoming a Beyonder. He had cut the Tarot Club short because he learned the true attitude the Nighthawks had towards the Antigonus notebook. He decided it was time to search for it seriously and not just nap through it. That would definitely raise some eyebrows with Dunn Smith. Besides, he had gained a lot from today's gathering. Klein sat on the high-backed chair at the head of the bronze table, arms resting on the armrest, fingers crossed as he observed the boundless gray fog. It felt serene, like a forgotten library where no one had stepped foot for eons. When he established the connection to summon the Hanged Man and Justice, he realized something new. He had the ability to touch another dark red star. Does this mean I can summon one more? Klein recalled the feeling and muttered to himself, half hopeful and half skeptical. However, he didn't want to make that leap. He didn't know who the new arrival would be or how they'd act. Not everyone was as chill as Justice or the Hanged Man, ready to jump into the deep end without a life vest. If he pulled someone like Dunn Smith into this, the mysterious organization he had just started would immediately catch the church's attention. As an evil organization's boss, his future would be looking grim, like an episode of a canceled sitcom. Klein knew that the gray fog was special. It wasn't something a Beyonder at Dunn Smith's sequence could see through, but he had to consider the god's existence. Klein carefully believed that the 7 orthodox gods existed in reality. Of course, he leaned towards the idea that these gods were just more powerful than high-sequence Beyonders, and they were under strict limitations. Ever since the 5th epoch, apart from a few oracles, they hadn't made a peep. Forcefully pulling people here isn't a good idea. No one wants to be dragged into some cosmic mystery for no reason. It's like inviting someone to a party, only for it to turn into an awkward therapy session. Let's wait and see how things go. Klein sighed and stood up. He released his spirituality and sensed his body's existence. Then he began mimicking the heavy feeling of rapidly plunging down, like a kid on a roller coaster. The scenes in front of him changed. The gray fog and dark red vanished like smoke from a magician's trick. Klein felt like he'd ripped through endless water membranes before finally seeing the real world, his room draped in darkness. This time, he was wide awake and took in the entire experience. Strange. There are some differences between the gray fog and the spirit world. Klein moved his limbs and felt the existence of his body. After he seriously thought through the experience, he shook his head, walked to the desk, and pulled open the curtains. Whoosh! The curtains were drawn as sunlight poured in, illuminating the room. As he looked at the street outside the oriel window and the pedestrians going back and forth, Klein took a deep breath and muttered silently, "It's time to go out and work? How should I act as a seer? It cannot be rushed. All I can do is use spirit vision now." Backlund, Empress Boro. Audrey Hall looked at herself in the mirror. She saw her cheeks flushed red with excitement and her eyes so bright that they would have daunted anyone from looking into them. She did not examine any of this as she hurriedly recalled. She picked up the ruby-studded fountain pen and wrote the formula to the spectator potion on the exquisite goatskin parchment. 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cow teeth painol powder, 7 petals of elf flowers, a matured manhwa fish's eyeball, 35 milliliters of goat horn blackfish blood. Phew. Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she read it a few times to confirm that she had not made any mistakes. She had the urge to dance again, but reminded herself to remain restrained. After some thought, she began writing various chemical names around the potion's formula. She then faked the page into complicated and messy chemistry. Yes, as long as one doesn't read it carefully, a person who flips through this randomly will not discover the details I have hidden in here. Excellent. Audrey praised herself and turned her mind towards the acquirement of the materials. I'll first search the few vaults we have. I'll then attempt to exchange for the missing parts with others. If I still can't gather them all, I can only seek help from the hanged man or the fool. What can I offer as payment? After some thought, Audrey closed the notebook and placed it on a tiny bookshelf. Following that, she briskly walked to the door and pulled it open. A golden retriever was sitting obediently outside. The corners of Audrey's mouth curled as she revealed a radiant smile. Susie, you completed the mission perfectly. In the serialized stories on the newspapers, detectives would often have a capable assistant. I think there should be a huge dog supporting a real spectator. In an underground basement lit only by a flickering candle, Alger Wilson raised his palm and looked at it carefully. After a long while, he let out a sigh. It's still that miraculous. I was unable to figure out any specific details at all. Despite having made sufficient preparations, he failed to understand how the fool had completed the summoning. He moved his gaze down and looked at the goatskin parchment on the table in front of him. At the title head of the yellowish-brown parchment, there was a Hermes sentence written in dark blue ink. 7. Seafarer. Chapter 37. The Club. Under the scorching afternoon sun, Klein left his house. Since he had to hoof it all the way from Iron Cross Street to Welch's place, he ditched the fancy formal attire and went for a more chill look. A linen shirt, brown coat, and a round felt hat made him look both casual and like someone who could give you life advice while sipping iced tea on a porch. Oh, and let's not forget the pair of old leather shoes that probably had seen more dirt than his future love life. He didn't want the swampy armpits of doom ruining his good suit, after all. As he strolled down Daffodil Street, taking his sweet time, he passed by the square and subconsciously took a glance. The tents from the circus were gone. Poof! Like magic. Klein had kind of hoped the animal trainer who gave him a fortune-telling session would turn out to be some secret badass. You know, like in those cliché tropes where some wise, mystical person shows up out of nowhere to guide you and then disappears in a puff of smoke? But nah, this ain't a Disney movie. She pieced out with the circus troupe, leaving Klein high and dry with no hints for his future. With a grin that said, "Welp, guess life ain't a fantasy novel," Klein turned toward Iron Cross Street. This place wasn't just a street. It was like a crossroad of every bad decision you ever made, complete with dingy apartments and questionable street food. The intersection split into left, right, upper, and lower streets. Klein, his bro Benson, and their sister Melissa used to live on Lower Street. Well, they called it Middle Street to avoid being lumped in with the folks 200 meters down who packed 10 people in a room. Gotta keep some level of dignity, right? As Klein walked down Left Street, his mind wandered back to the Antigonus family's notebook. It was still MIA, and that thing was so important, the Nighthawks would lose their shot over it. Plus, people had died for it, so yeah, not the best vibes. His mood was already in the gutter when he heard a familiar voice. Lad. Oh, damn, not now, Grandma. He turned his head and saw Mrs. Wendy from Smyron Bakery. Her gray hair gleamed under the sun as she waved, all smiles. You don't look too happy, she said, her tone so sweet it could give you cavities. Klein rubbed his face, trying to shake off the bad juju. A little down. Ah, don't worry, lad. Tomorrow will always come, Wendy said with the wisdom of someone who had probably seen it all. Here, have some of my newly made sweet iced tea. I'm testing it out, so it's on the house. Yes, free stuff. Trying not to look too eager, Klein accepted the offer. Locals? I thought you were one of us, Mrs. Smyron? With a wink, she replied. You guessed wrong, lad. I'm actually from the South. Came here with my hubby over 40 years ago, before your parents even knew each other. I've always missed the food back home. Pork sausages, potato bread, roasted pancakes. Just talking about it makes me hungry. But the sweet iced tea? That's what I miss the most. As she waxed poetic about Southern comfort food, Klein couldn't help but grin. Well, Mrs. Smyron, this conversation is making me hungrier by the second. But thanks, I do feel a bit better. Good food heals the soul, she said, handing him a cup of brownish-red liquid. Tell me if this iced tea reminds you of home. Klein took a sip and nearly melted on the spot. It tasted like iced red tea from Earth, but better, like someone slapped some extra refreshing on it and called it a day. This is amazing, he said, his spirits instantly lifted. Wendy beamed. Glad you liked it. After some more chit-chat about his move, Klein returned to the streets he knew like the back of his hand. By afternoon, the street vendors looked like they were barely hanging on to their will to live, and honestly, Klein could relate. But as he walked deeper into the district, a wave of gloom hit him. It was like someone took a bucket of sadness and just dumped it over him. What the hell? His sixth sense was tingling, warning him that something was off. He looked around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. After thinking it over, he did the old tap-tap on his forehead, activating his spirit vision. The street came to life in auras, mostly dull and tired, like the people had given up on life. And man, the gloom was heavy. It hung over the place like a cloud that even the sun couldn't chase away. He sighed. Yep, just as old Neil had said, using spirit vision sometimes made things worse, dragging you into emotional pits you didn't sign up for. Years of repression, huh? Klein muttered, shaking his head to clear the feeling. After another forehead tap, he managed to turn off his spirit vision and started checking for anything abnormal. Was the Antigonus family's notebook nearby? Were there any spooky spirits lurking in the shadows? Nope, just the usual filth and trash on the streets. The apartment building he entered was dark and dingy, but familiar. He crept up the creaky stairs, the kind of stairs that announced your presence even if you tried to be stealthy. As expected, no ghostly figures or creepy spirits greeted him on the second or third floor. Just silence. Guess if it were that easy, everyone would already know about this supernatural stuff, Klein mused, realizing that real spiritual interactions weren't as straightforward as meeting Casper for a chat. It was all about spirituality, which made it impossible for regular folks to notice. With nothing to show for his efforts, Klein decided to leave the apartment and try his luck at Welch's place, walking for what felt like forever without finding squat. Standing outside Welch's gardened bungalow, Klein muttered, "Do I really need to search this place? Captain and Madam Daly already turned this place upside down. And besides, I don't have a key. What am I, Spider-Man? They can't expect me to scale the walls, right?" Feeling the fatigue in his legs, he added with a sigh, "All this walking and no step counter ranking? Lame." He decided to head back, hopping on a public carriage to Blackthorn Security Company. He had some practice to do. After all, if his seer abilities couldn't protect him, his revolver sure as hell would. Nothing says, "Get out of my face," like a good old-fashioned bullet. Just as he reached the district, something caught his eye, a few signboards hanging from the second floor of a building. One read, "Divination Club." Divination Club? He repeated the name in his head, remembering his need to act like a proper seer. Yeah, I should check it out. Maybe get some fresh ideas. With curiosity piqued, Klein headed to the second floor and was greeted by a gorgeous female attendant who sized him up before speaking. "Sir, are you here for a fortune-telling? Chapter 38, Novice Hobbyist." Klein wasn't ready for the attitude change in the receptionist. The elegant lady with her perfectly tied up brownish yellow hair was starting to lose her cool, but that smile was still glued to her face like she was on the verge of snapping. Our members can do divination for others, and they have their own prices. We only take a small cut, just enough for coffee money. If you're interested in having your fortune told, you can check this album. It's got the members' intros and rates. She pointed to a dusty album that looked like it hadn't been updated since forever. Although, it's Monday afternoon, so most of our members are probably pretending to work. We only have 5 in today. Klein gave her a polite nod, internally thinking, great, the stars of divination are out sick. She motioned him to a sofa near a window and began flipping through the album, giving the rundown of the few members who actually showed up. Hanas Vincent, big shot around here. He's like the Messi of fortune-telling, charges 4 solly per session. Klein almost choked at the price. That's enough to feed Benson, Melissa, and me for 2 luxurious dinners, or a solid hangover weekend. He kept his poker face but mentally rolled his eyes. Noticing his silence, the receptionist continued. She wasn't about to lose a sale. And lastly, we have Glasses. He's new, joined this year. Tarot is his jam. He charges 2 pence. Now that, Klein could work with. Which one do you want? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Mr. Glasses, Klein replied without hesitation. There was an awkward 2-second pause before she warned. Just so you know, Mr. Glasses is... Well, he's still in the kiddie pool of fortune-telling. Klein chuckled. I'll take responsibility for my decision. The lady gave a reluctant nod and led him through a short hallway to a door. Inside, Klein could see a dude who looked like he'd walked straight out of a hipster cafe. Glasses appeared by the door, curiosity lighting up his dark green eyes as he spotted Klein. He had a good vibe going. Light skin, dark green eyes, and the faint coffee smell of someone who spends too much time in a library. Mr. Glasses, someone wants a divination, the lady announced, and Glasses blinked in surprise. Me, well, all right. Which room? He asked. Topaz room, Glasses answered, his eyes lingering on Klein like a curious cat. I like Topaz. Topaz? Well, okay then. Whatever floats your mystical boat, dude. The Topaz room was dim, the curtains shut like it was hiding from sunlight. Great, we're going full spooky mode. Klein thought as he followed Glacis in. He sat down, trying to hide his amusement, as Glacis gave a gentlemanly bow and gestured for him to sit. Listen, man, I'm still figuring this stuff out, Glacis said with surprising honesty. I'm not exactly the fortune teller of the year. You still have time to back out. Nah, you're good. I like to stick with my choices, Klein replied with a grin. Glacis leaned forward, all serious now. Divination is my hobby. You ever get those random divine hints in life, but you just can't decode them? That's why divination exists. But hey, I'm still an amateur, so let's make this free. You know, as a trade, I'll cover the club fee. It's only a quarter pence. Klein smiled, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. This guy's too honest for his own good. You seem like you've got a decent job, Klein teased, leaning back. Guy's dressed like he's ready for a museum tour. Job doesn't make my divination any better, though, Glasses shot back with a grin. Headache, huh? You want to divine for health? Nah, just a small thing. I want to know where an item is, Klein said, his excuse ready. They shuffled through the usual tarot card routine, and the first card came up inverted. The Fool. Seriously? It's that fool again? Klein thought as his mind raced. What are the odds? Unbothered, Klein moved forward with the next divination question. Was the item in someone else's hands? This time, they got the Star card, but it was inverted. Well, looks like your item's still up for grabs, Glasses concluded with a satisfied smile. Klein stood up, casually dropping 2 pennies on the table. Respect for the craft, man. You didn't need to, but thanks, Glasses replied, shaking his hand. As Klein headed for the door, he suddenly turned back, almost as an afterthought. Hey, just a tip. You might want to check your lungs out. Why? Glasses asked, raising an eyebrow. You've got that, dark glabella thing going on, Klein said, as if it was the most obvious diagnosis in the world. Glasses was confused but amused. What the hell is a glabella again? Klein waved it off with a smirk and left. Meanwhile, Glasses caught a glimpse of himself in his monocle and realized that, thanks to the dim room, his entire face was covered in shadows. Dark glabella? Yeah, right? Well, that wasn't a very funny joke, Glasses muttered, as he decided to divine his own health, just to be sure. Glasses muttered to himself, It's not a very likable joke, as he worriedly divined his own health, just to be sure. After leaving the divination club, Klein had an additional plan for the future. He needed to save as much money as possible to pay the annual fee and become a member of the club. Once a member, he could start officially acting as a seer. He knew trying to operate independently would be tough. He lacked the resources and connections. Plus, there was no way he'd stand on the streets hawking divinations. His reputation was worth more than that. A few minutes later, Klein boarded a public carriage, paying 2 pence to reach Zouteland Street, which wasn't too far away. When he entered the Blackthorn Security Company, the familiar face of the brown-haired girl, Roseanne, was missing. Instead, Leonard Mitchell was at the reception counter, his black hair and green eyes giving him that poetic, brooding look he always had. "Good afternoon. Where's Roseanne?" Klein asked, tipping his hat as a greeting. Leonard smiled, pointing toward the partition. "She's got the night shift at the armory." Before Klein could ask anything else, Leonard suddenly seemed to be mulling over something, and then, with a thoughtful expression, he said, "Klein, there's something I've always wondered." "What is it?" Klein asked, his curiosity piqued. Leonard got up, pacing a little, before turning to face Klein. His relaxed tone didn't match the seriousness of his words. "Why did Welch and Naya commit suicide on the spot, but you managed to return home?" Klein was taken aback, but he gave the official answer that he had memorized. "It likely has to do with how the unknown existence made me take the Antigonus family's notebook away to hide it." Leonard, still pacing, then stopped, staring intently at Klein as though he were trying to unravel a mystery. "If your suicide was meant to silence you and erase all traces, then why weren't you made to destroy the notebook there and then?" Chapter 39? Interesting trick. In fact, I do not know if the notebook is destroyed or hidden, but using backward reasoning, if it's to be destroyed, it could have been done on the spot. There was no need for me to take it away to carry out the destruction. Unless it was some kind of arts and crafts project gone wrong. Upon hearing Leonard's question, Klein instantly went into keyboard detective mode and said with a sigh, "Perhaps when Welch, Naya, and I made contact with the unknown existence, it enjoyed the sacrifice of life or wished for similar situations to continue. With the suicide definitely easily discoverable, I was made to take away the notebook to hide it so as to prepare for the existence's second round of entertainment. However, some mishap happened during the process, and I failed to succeed in my suicide." Klein was clearly taking inspiration from those thrillers where the hero is way too smart for their own good. "I swear, I watched too many movies," he thought. This was a reasoned guess Klein made from his consumption of novels, movies, and TV dramas involving cult sacrifices. Next time, maybe I should just binge watch cooking shows instead. As for the mishap that happened midway, he knew very well that it was due to the unexpected variable of him being a transmigrator. Seriously, being a transmigrator is like getting a bonus level in life, one filled with confusing plot twists and existential crises. Quite a good explanation, but I believe there might be other possibilities. Welch's and Naya's suicide sacrifice might have made it possible for the unknown existence to descend on this world. Then, that notebook is a vessel or a breeding ground for evil. It made you take it away to hide it, worried that we would destroy it if we discovered its birth, before it became strong. Leonard Mitchell suggested another possibility. Having said that, he stared into Klein's eyes and smiled slightly. That smile was the kind that made you question if you had toilet paper stuck to your shoe. Of course, perhaps the notebook has been destroyed. The goal is to hide its content, to conceal the vessel or the brooding of evil. That way, there is a sufficient reason for your failed suicide. What does he mean? Is he suspecting me? Is he suspecting that the original Klein's body is a vessel or used for the brooding of evil? No, what he's being a vessel for is a transmigrator. Actually, brooding isn't a correct term. Klein was taken aback. While he secretly criticized the idea, he weighed his words. "I will not try to defend myself since I've lost memories from that period. Be it Captain or Madame Daly, they have already confirmed that I'm fine. Your joke isn't funny. I'm only considering a possibility. It does not eliminate the blow the unknown existence encountered when it descended, which caused your suicide to fail. We believe that the goddess will ultimately bless us." Leonard laughed as he changed the subject. Did you discover anything in the afternoon? After the conversation and the previous encounters, Klein was very wary of Leonard. He answered in a composed manner, No. I plan on trying a different route tomorrow afternoon. He pointed to the partition and said, I'll need to head to the armory to draw the bullets. The shooting club opened at 9 at night. After all, its availability increased only after many of its members got off work. You know how it is, night owls and all that jazz. May Goddess bless you. Leonard smiled as he gestured the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. He watched Klein pass through the partition and listened to his footsteps down the stairs. Leonard's smile gradually vanished as a look of doubt appeared in his green eyes. He whispered something with a displeased tone. Was it something about Klein's questionable life choices? Because it sounded like someone was throwing shade. Down the stairs, Klein followed the gas lamp-illuminated corridor to the armory and archives. The iron door was open, and the brown-haired Roseanne was standing in front of the table. She was chatting with a top hat-wearing middle-aged man with a thick black beard. Good afternoon, no. Good evening. It's always night here. Klein, I heard from old Neil that you have become a beyonder? It's called seer? Roseanne turned her head and deluged him with her questions. She did not hide her curiosity and concern. I mean, who wouldn't be concerned if someone decided to play with the dark arts? Klein nodded with a smile. Good afternoon, Miss Roseanne. It's indeed always night here, but it makes one feel a sense of serenity. The description you gave wasn't accurate enough. It should be said that the sequence potion I consumed has the name Seer. You still chose to become a Beyonder after all. Roseanne said with a sigh as she fell into deep thought, probably contemplating her life choices too, like, why do I even associate with these weirdos? Klein looked at the middle-aged man beside her and asked politely, You are? Another Nighthawk member, or one of the other 2 civilian staff I have not met? Roseanne puckered her lips and said, Brett, our colleague. He wishes to change slots with me to free up the night after tomorrow. He plans on going to the theater in the North District with his wife to watch The Prideful One. It's to celebrate their 15th year wedding anniversary. He's truly a romantic gentleman. Brett smiled as he extended his hand and said, With Miss Roseanne around, there's nothing that requires repeating. Hello, Klein. I never expected you to become a Beyonder so quickly. As for me, I might never have the courage. Perhaps it's as the saying goes, the ignorant knows no fear, Klein said in a self-deprecating manner as he extended his hand to shake Brett's. Me not having courage is not something bad, said Brett, shaking his head. A Beyonder once told me before his death to never probe the strange and dangerous matters. The less you know, the longer you live. At that moment, Roseanne interjected, Klein, there's no need to mind it. I heard from old Neil that as a seer, you are used as support. It's relatively safe as long as you do not attempt to communicate with unknown existences. Why are you dressed in such clothes? It's so unbecoming of a gentleman. What are you here for? I'm here to draw my 30 bullets. Klein did not reply to Roseanne's first question. He believed that the lady would quickly forget the matter. If only she could forget my fashion sense as easily. All right, Roseanne pointed at the table and said, Brett, it's all yours. You should know where the keys and bullets are. Oh, old Neil really is petty. He did not even leave his hand-ground coffee behind. He promised me that I could drink my fill today. She prattled on as Klein received the bullets. The duo left together and went their separate ways at Zoudeland Street. One took a public carriage home while the other walked into the shooting club. Bang, bang, bang. Klein repeated the process, gripping the gun, raising his arms, shooting, releasing the cylinder, ejecting the empty shells, and stuffing in rounds, again and again. He became familiar with the process and built it into his muscle memory. If only I could get paid for every time I do this. Oh wait, I can! Of course, he had a few breaks in between to review and correct the process. After finishing his practice, Klein used the grounds to do various exercises like push-ups. He worked hard to train his body to improve his physique. Gotta get that summer body, even if summer is like 10 months away. Once everything was over, he sat in an untracked carriage home. Only then did he realize it was nearing 7 and the sky was already dark. Just as Klein was planning to head to the market or streets to buy the ingredients for dinner, The door opened. Melissa had returned with her stationery-filled bag. Apart from that, she carried quite a lot of groceries. Was she planning to feed an army? I thought you and Benson would be home rather late. This morning, I took out one solly from the place you hide the money. Upon seeing her brother's questioning look, Melissa explained in her usual serious manner. Since you took the money, why didn't you take the public carriage to school? Klein had been reminded of the matter from the morning. Melissa said with a frown, Why should I take a public carriage? It costs 4 pence to get to school. A return trip means 8 pence. Counting Benson and you, we will be spending 24 pence on transportation daily. That's a whole solly. In a week, yes. Without counting Sunday, that's still 12 pence. It's almost equal to our rent. Stop, stop, stop. Don't flaunt your mathematical prowess. Klein lowered his palm in an amused manner. I swear, if you keep this up, I'm going to hire you as my accountant. Melissa first stopped before adding, It's pretty good walking to school. Our teacher said that everyone should exercise frequently. Besides, I can pick some damaged components on the way. Klein chuckled and said, Then let's do the math again. The public carriage costs 12 solely. The rent is 12 solely and 3 pence. It's a total of £1, 4 solely and 3 pence. Using Benson's salary is enough to pay for it, and there will be quite a bit of change left. Yes, he has received last week's salary. As for me, I can still earn £1 10 solely every week. Even if we eat meat every day while counting expenses like gas, charcoal, wood, and condiments, we would still have some left if we are frugal with lunch. We can even subscribe to the morning papers for just 1 penny. In 2 months, when I make up for the advanced payment, I can save money for both you and Benson. We can have new clothes. But we have to think of the possible accidents. Melissa stayed firm on her point. Klein smiled at her and said, Then we can eat less meat. Don't you find spending 100 minutes on the road a waste of time? You could use that time to read more and think over problems and improve your results. That way, Melissa, you will graduate with excellent grades. You will be able to find a job with a pretty good salary. When that happens, what is there to worry about? He fully displayed his experience gained from debating with people on message boards and finally convinced Melissa. She agreed to take the public carriage to school. Phew, I finally suckered her into doing it. No, how can I call it suckering? This is called convincing. Klein lampooned before taking over the groceries that Melissa had bought. He said with a sigh, Remember to buy beef or meat like mutton and chicken. Eat until you're full and enjoy yourself. Only then will you be equipped with a healthy body and a clever brain to match the demanding requirements needed for your studies. Just mentioning it makes me salivate. Melissa puckered her lips and after a few seconds of silence, said, All right. The next morning, after ensuring that Melissa took a public carriage, Klein and Benson separated and went to their respective companies. The moment Klein stepped into the door, he saw old Neil and Roseanne chatting by the reception desk. The former was still in his classic black robe, without any concern for the gazes of others. The latter had changed into a casual cream-colored dress. Good morning, Mr. Neil, Miss Roseanne, greeted Klein as he took off his hat. Old Neil gave him a mischievous look. Good morning. You did not hear anything you shouldn't have heard last night, right? No, I slept very well. Klein was also quite puzzled over that. He could only put it down to his inadequate perception. Haha, don't mind that. Actually, it's not that easily heard. Old Neil pointed to the partition and said, Go to the armory. We will continue our mysticism lessons this morning. Klein nodded and followed Old Neil down the stairs and arrived at the armory to replace Brett, who had been on duty the entire night. What will we be learning today? Asked Klein curiously. Old Neil dragged out his response and said, The complicated and basic knowledge. But before that, let me teach you an interesting trick. He pointed at the silver chain on his wrist. There was a pure moonstone hanging from the chain. Chapter 40, Mysticism Curriculum. An interesting trick? Klein asked. His curiosity piqued like a cat spotting a laser pointer. Old Neil chuckled. I'll finish my patrol of the armory, storeroom, and archives. In the meantime, use those 2 cups on the table to whip up some coffee. Just for fun, in 1 cup, toss in something unpleasant. As for what it is, let your imagination run wild. But please, don't go crazy with the coffee powder. Those beans are from the Feinapotter Plateau, and I ground them myself. All right, Klein agreed, though he had no idea what old Neil was scheming. After watching old Neil unlock the iron gates to the armory with a copper key, he heard the echo of footsteps fading into the abyss. He set the cups down and checked the kettle, still steaming like a dragon's breath. With a gleam in his eye, Klein popped the lid off a silver tin can and scooped a spoonful of that rich aromatic coffee powder into each cup, pouring in the hot water and giving it a stir like he was mixing up a potion for a magic spell. As a transmigrator from an era overflowing with resources, he was no stranger to coffee. But let's be real. He was only familiar with instant coffee, the kind you'd make when you needed a pick-me-up but didn't want to get off the couch. Once he completed his task, Klein sat down, crossed his right leg, and thought hard. He grabbed a chunk of mud from the bottom of his leather boot, hey, it's organic, and plopped it into the left cup. With a careful stir, he made the two cups practically indistinguishable in color and aroma. If anyone asked, he could claim it was a new artisanal blend. A few minutes later, old Neil sauntered out of the armory, keys jangling like a wannabe rock star. He closed the iron gates with a satisfying clang. "Are you done?" he asked, his slightly murky red eyes flicking over to Klein across the table. "Yes," Klein replied, nodding like a bobblehead. Old Neil chuckled and removed the silver chain from his wrist, sitting down like it was the most normal thing in the world. His expression turned serious faster than a cat on a hot tin roof. He held out his chain-holding left hand, letting it hover over the coffee cup to his right. The moonstone dangled dangerously close to the liquid, like a celebrity about to drop a scandal. Suddenly, the moonstone began to tremble and spin counterclockwise like it was trying to escape a bad date. "This cup has the unpleasant thing," old Neil declared confidently. Without waiting for Klein to confirm, he picked up the other cup and took a sip like it was fine wine. "Do you like your coffee bitter? I usually add a tablespoon of sugar and a splash of milk, but hey, whatever floats your boat." Klein, intrigued, asked, "Your divination skills are impressive. Is that because of the moonstone?" "That is moonstone, right? That's called pendulum dowsing in divination. Some folks call it spirit dowsing. It's all about your astral projection connecting with the spirit world, using natural materials like crystals or special metals to tap into spiritual intelligence. You can divine the good and the bad. Speaking of coffee, a counterclockwise motion is a bad sign, while clockwise means good. If it doesn't move, it's a big old meh. Just write a statement, not a question," old Neil explained, putting down his cup like it was a prophecy. Klein pondered aloud. "So, I can't ask, is so-and-so willing to be my fiancé? Instead, I should ask, so-and-so is willing to be my fiancé. Write that down and place it on the desk, right?" "Yes, exactly. Then use your dominant hand to hold the pendulum chain, keeping your arm straight. Adjust the chain until the moonstone is hovering just above your statement, like it's about to drop some serious wisdom. Close your eyes, repeat the statement 7 times, and then check if the pendulum swings. If it doesn't, just rinse and repeat until it moves," old Neil chuckled. Klein nodded slowly. "So, counterclockwise means no, and clockwise means yes?" "Yep, or success and failure. It's a 2-for-1 deal," old Neil corrected him, sharing more nuggets of wisdom about spirit pendulum divination. Klein mused, realizing this could come in handy. He could quickly determine if the food offered to him was poisonous without needing a biology degree. Of course, he knew these divination methods were simplistic. The answers were limited to 2 or 3 options. No deep dives allowed. Sure, some things might be harmful, but that they could also be beneficial if processed right. Like that suspicious food he once ate on a dare. Not his best moment, but hey, he survived. "I need to save up for crystals or pure silver to make a spirit pendulum," Klein sighed, dreaming of the day he could flaunt his mystical swag. Old Neil raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "You can apply for one directly. This is standard for Beyonders, especially support roles like us. There's a topaz and pure silver pendulum chilling in the armory. But I'm not a formal team member yet." Klein's heart raced, excitement and hesitation battling it out. Old Neil grinned. "For Beyonders, it doesn't matter if you're official or not. You need the tools to do your job since there's no pay raise involved." "Maybe perk is a better word. I'll hit up the captain later." Klein clenched his fists, determination bubbling up like soda shaken too hard. How was he supposed to know if the captain would approve his request without trying? All right, old Neil smiled. Now we can kick off our mysticism curriculum. Let's start with symbolism. Do you know what that means? Klein racked his brain and replied, Symbolism refers to things beyond our sensory world, like the spirit realm or the mysterious stellar space. It can't be described accurately by our ears, noses, or eyes. What we get are indescribable experiences and direct revelations, represented by abstract characters or pictorial symbols. Spot on. A true seer. Old Neil nodded solemnly. To grasp the world of mysticism, you need to interpret these symbols. The pictures on tarot cards are all symbols, man-made ones that help us decode primordial revelations. He pulled out a piece of paper and grabbed a fountain pen, drawing a short curve. He added a few vertical lines beneath the curve and looked at Klein, asking, Do you know what this symbol represents? Klein squinted at it for a while before hesitantly guessing, Eyelashes? Old Neil sighed. This is the symbol of the Bumper Harvest constellation, and this one is the Thunderous constellation, and this is the Frost constellation. He casually drew more symbols. Klein, memorizing them, couldn't help but comment. The names of these constellations are really, let's just say, lacking sophistication. Yeah, totally unsophisticated. How tacky and primordial, old Neil smirked. Emperor Roselle thought the same. He wanted to rename the constellations to something classy, like Virgo or Scorpio. Unfortunately, he didn't have the power to change tradition. At least these old names and the corresponding dates they represent help with farming and harvests. Gotta hand it to Emperor Roselle. He had ideas, Klein mused, scratching his head. Organizations like a divination club might also have cultists or members of evil organizations in them. As a civilian staff member of the Nighthawks and a Standard Beyonder, your membership makes it easy for us to monitor them. It's part of the job. We would regularly monitor these places, but as we lack manpower, we can't keep watch on them for long. Now, it can be handled by you. I can do that? As he looked at old Neil's serious expression, Klein was dumbfounded. This is making an expense claim for private matters. I know nothing about such matters. You wish to use your own money to do this? Old Neil smiled as he added when he saw Klein's face. Klein immediately shook his head as he answered firmly, I plan on reporting it to Captain. Old Neil nodded in satisfaction and looked at the cup of coffee with the unpleasant thing inside. It had not been poured away. What did you put in there? Klein smiled embarrassingly. It's just some dirt underneath my boots. Its color and your coffee powder look almost the same. Old Neil was taken aback as he suddenly clasped his mouth and roared. Why aren't you pouring it away yet?